A country's most prized products often reflect the personality of its people. Canadian whiskies, mostly blends of rye and neutral grain spirits, underscore the easy nature of both Canada and its whiskey.
Canadian whiskey is probably the lightest and most delicate and easiest to embrace whiskey of all the major whiskey producing countries.
Canada's distillers, the world's #3 producers of whiskey, make almost 48 million gallons of whiskey per year. The Canadian national style originated in 1884 with the introduction of one of the country's best-known whiskies, Canadian Club. The Canadian Club Classic 12-year-old is the company's most mature expression of its flavor profile.
What we do get is vanilla, and lots of it. We do get some of that grainy character from the rye. That is all the way through an enjoyable, pleasant drink.
The lightness of Canadian Club comes from its base whiskey, a corn distillate with no color. It may comprise as much as 80 to 90% of the volume, and unlike U.S. bourbons, has almost all of the corn's grainy flavor distilled out of it. The whiskey blends of other countries like Scotland and Ireland contain less of this neutral base whiskey and tend to have a more aggressive taste. Canadian Club's flavoring component is distilled from fermented rye, rye malt, and barley malt.
To be called a Canadian whiskey, the government has set forth rules and regulations. For example, we have to use a variety of different grains. It has to be manufactured and aged here in Canada for a minimum of 3 years. And similar to the Scottish and Irish distillers, we're able to use our barrels several times.
At Canadian Club, those barrels are once-used bourbon barrels purchased from the U.S.
We Canadians get to use our barrels several times, therefore attributing to a lighter oak flavor profile product.
The Canadian Club line features 4 different whiskeys.
There's our standard 6-year-old Canadian Club, which is available in 151 countries around the world. CC Reserve, our 10-year-old format, is our premium version. The Super Premium Classic 12 by Canadian Club, and of course, CC Sherry Cask.
Canadian Club owes its tradition of elegant whiskies to its founder, Hiram Walker. He worked in what is now the Canadian Club Heritage Centre.
So we're now in the Canadian Club's founding father's office, Hiram Walker. Mr. Hiram Walker came to Canada in 1856, and in 1858 he opened the distillery. This is actually Hiram Walker's desk, where he used to conduct business on a daily basis.
A U.S. citizen, Walker opened his distillery in Windsor, Ontario, across the river from his home in Detroit, because he feared the growing power of the temperance movement in the U.S. He may have been off by 60 years, but in 1920, when Prohibition hit the U.S., Walker's sons had inherited the company. They found eager distributors of their Canadian whiskey, the Purple Gang, who were mostly Jewish mobsters out of Detroit, as well as the Chicago Mob.
When Prohibition entered into the U.S. in 1920, the boys from the Purple Gang out of downtown Detroit would come over here to conduct business. Mr. Capone himself would conduct business at this table with the Hiram Walker boys. And this became known as the Speakeasy, which is still what we're using it for today.
The mile-wide Detroit River separates Detroit from Windsor, Ontario. During Prohibition, smugglers made the short trip across to Canada, loaded up with Canadian Club, and then distributed the product to a thirsty U.S. populace. People came across the Detroit River by boat. Or during winter freezes, it became an ice road for smugglers.
The sales of Canadian Club rose drastically during Prohibition.
But since mobsters had a hand in distribution, shipments were often hijacked. A system of coded telegrams was developed to throw thieves off the trail.
This one's dated July 31st, 1931. Just above it, they uncoded it. We have 300 cases of Club have left on its way to London, so this became very, very popular way of transporting product.
One Canadian Club bottle, known as the Prohibition bottle, was a favorite with drinkers.
It's concave in the back. The guys would slip it into their pockets and the ladies were strapping it on their leg, and this bottle kind of hugs your body. Another name for this bottle was known as the bootlegger bottle. The reason for that is ladies back then used to wear long gowns and the boots had straps in them. They would strap these bottles to their leg, thus came the term bootlegger.
Canadian Club's whiskeys were known then, as they are now, for being cocktail-friendly.
My favorite cocktail is what I've called the Millionaire's Manhattan. A measure and a half of Canadian Club Classic 12-year-old. Next, add a half a measure of Harvey's Bristol Cream. And last but not least, garnish it with a couple of maraschino cherries. The Millionaire's Manhattan.
Canadian whiskeys express a distinct national character that has little in common with U.S. whiskeys. During Prohibition, 1 million gallons of Canadian liquor per year, 80% of that nation's output, made its way into the United States.